Hey everyone! So in this video I'm going to be talking about different life cycles of different animals and explaining kind of how to figure out where mitosis and meiosis is happening, where fertilization is happening, when things are haploid and when things are diploid. So we're going to start with the human life cycle. I know that you guys have a picture of this in your notes, but it's not very in detail, so I want to make sure I go through it with you as well. If you want to draw it beside the picture, that would be lovely. So first, we have to have a female. Females, because they are adults, would be 2N, which means that they're diploid. And females create gametes called eggs, which are haploid, or N amount of chromosomes. And males would be the same, except for they produce sperm gametes instead. So when these two things come together, an egg and a sperm, it's called a zygote. Because we have an N plus an N, we're back to 2N. And then we would go through the phase of cleavage and produce a morula, and then eventually a blastocyst, which would implant into the uterus, and we would have an embryo that has the 3 germ layers, and eventually a fetus would be developing. Eventually the baby would be born and be called an infant, and it would grow into a toddler, and then a child, and then eventually be a teenager. And I just put it back to going to the female, the adult female, but it could potentially also be a male. So in this life cycle, meiosis would be where we're going from 2N to N, when we're going from the individual creating the egg or the individual creating the sperm. Remember, the egg would be created in the ovary and the sperm would be created inside the testes. When these two things come together, it's called fertilization to create our zygote. And then all of the other stuff is mitosis. So cleavage, phase, and growing larger is all mitosis. So that is what the human life cycle looks like. We're a little bit more aware of kind of the phases of that because we are human and we kind of understand how humans work. We're going to talk about alternation of generations. So that means basically when we're switching between sexual reproduction and asexual reproduction in our life cycle. And it seems like something that would happen in other organisms, but it is happening in humans. So all of the mitosis happening is technically asexual reproduction to make new cells. And then sexual reproduction happens when we use meiosis to make sex cells like eggs and sperm and combine them together in fertilization. So all of this is sexual reproduction and all of this is asexual. So now we're going to look at a bunch of other organisms because we might not understand them as much as we understand humans. So for example, fern. Okay, and I'm going to give you guys a couple tricks. So for example, if you ever see the word gametophyte in a life cycle of an organism, gametophyte kind of sounds like gametes. And in our gametes, we have egg or sperm. That doesn't necessarily mean that all other organisms have egg and sperm. So gametophyte is a word to describe a haploid tissue that usually creates gametes. So you can see using mitosis, it creates gametes. So this tissue is haploid. It only has half the number of chromosomes, and it creates gametes, which are also haploid. And then we can see them coming together in fertilization to produce a zygote. We know that zygotes are diploid. And then through mitosis, it creates something called a sporophyte, and then eventually goes through meiosis to create spores. So in the purple side of my picture, all of this stuff is representing all of the diploid phase of the fern. And then on the green side of the picture, that is my haploid phase. So when we have spores creating gametophytes to gametes, that is my haploid phase of my fern life cycle. So you don't have to have this life cycle memorized, but you need to understand what gametophyte means. You need to recognize kind of after we go through fertilization, it should be diploid. After we go through meiosis, it should be haploid. And it just kind of continues in this circle. Moths, on the other hand, have a little bit of a different phase. So again, I give you kind of prompting words like meiosis, going from here to here is meiosis. Going from here to here is fertilization. Okay, I also see something called the sporophyte. I also see gametophytes. I see egg and I see sperm. So that's going to be helpful. Okay, gametophytes and egg and sperm are haploid cells. They go through fertilization and they produce diploid cells. Then those diploid cells would go through meiosis and produce haploid cells again, and it would continue in the circle. So all I have to be able to do is recognize certain things in my life cycle and understand where is it haploid, where is it diploid. Okay, sometimes it might not tell you where mitosis is happening or meiosis or fertilization, and that's where you have to label stuff. But just being able to kind of pick out certain things in our life cycle and kind of understand what's happening. Don't have it memorized. Conifers, so a type of tree, it says that we have gametophytes over here. It goes through fertilization, then we have sporophytes, and then meiosis. So the blue side should be our haploid side, and then once fertilization happens, that should be our diploid side. And then we continue in the circle. And then lastly, our last example that we're going to go through is the jellyfish life cycle. And if you know me, you know that I love jellyfish, and this is the only time in Bio30 I actually get to talk about it, so it's very exciting. So we don't have to know a ton about jellyfish. Just again, the same thing that we talked about before. This one doesn't have necessarily any missing words that I like blanked out, but there are things that are not written on our diagram. So like, where are things haploid? Well, I see egg and sperm, and I see zygotes. That's helpful. I know egg and sperm are haploid cells, and I know a zygote is a diploid cell, and to produce a zygote, I have to go through fertilization. This is interesting because jellyfish can do this phase a bunch, stay in the asexual phase, or they can use the sexual phase of their life cycle depending on the environment, depending on the conditions. So that's interesting, depending on the species as well and where they live. So we won't get into all the details. I could talk about this for hours, but it's super cool. So once we have a zygote, it turns into a larva and then a polyp, and then the polyp can bud asexually, eventually into a medusa. So all of that is mitosis because it's all two end cells. And if that's the case, then the only place that we're having meiosis happen is the medusa, the free-swimming jellyfish, is the one that's creating egg or sperm. It would technically, from some species, come out of like different jellyfish. This is just showing one jellyfish producing both, which in other species, they can produce both female and male gametes. Just totally depends on which jellyfish we're talking about. And then other jellyfish can actually go backwards in their life cycle if they need to, which is super interesting as well. So again, we're not going to get into all of the details because I could talk about this for hours, but understanding kind of where all the processes are happening, where it's haploid, where it's diploid, that is the most important thing that we need to know from this lesson. So I want you guys to answer this question for me. What are some possible advantages to asexual reproduction? You tell me. Okay, you should have learned this in grade 9. So tell me about it.